Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. For those of you that don't know, I'm Mike Rawlings, Mayor of the City of Dallas. It's great to have the U.S. Conference of Mayors here, not only for all the fun we're having, but because of the substantive work that is being accomplished. President Johnson and I kicked Thursday off with what we felt was one of the most pressing issues facing America, and that is the income and economic disparity between the haves and the have-nots. I suggested in Dallas it was more than an income gap, but really a chasm, and much work needs to be done. I believe that we need pragmatic, long-term, nonpartisan ideas to move this issue ahead that will take place at the local city level. So I'm enthused when I heard President Johnson lay out his vision of Cities 3.0 and the importance of this initiative that he will announce today. Thank you to all the mayors to come to Dallas and join arms with me and together to say we can deal with this issue. It's not an easy one, but with the vigor and the intelligence I think we have in this room, we can make many accomplishments. Again, thank you for your leadership, President Johnson, and tell us what you're going to do.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, let's give another round of applause for our host mayor, Mayor Rawlings. So as you know, there's a big chasm that exists in this country between the haves and the have-nots. And sadly, the gap is getting wider, and that is not acceptable for mayors around this country. The reality is that many people in our cities are falling further and further behind. In my inauguration speech, I talked about Cities 3.0. We talked about what this generation of cities needs to be about. We talked about what we as mayors collectively need to do. And we believe strongly that we need to have cities that work for everyone. The least among us need to be able to participate in the great things that go on in our communities. Unfortunately, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to preschool, when it comes to broadband, when it comes to issues of income inequality, when it comes to a host of issues that our least among us are not participating in, we as mayors are not doing our part. So I am very proud to say we are starting a task force that the mayor of New York City, Mayor de Blasio, will be leading. It's called Cities of Opportunities. And that task force will work on a host of issues around income inequality. So I won't keep you long. You're going to have a host of speakers here today. We have a cleanup speaker here. I'm not going to say who she is yet, but she's going to come and put it all in perspective, because when you think about this great country, what the Kennedy family have stood for and what they have represented, she has a report out, and that report talks about women issues and the economic disparities. So you're first going to hear from a few mayors, and then we have a very special guest who will come up. So at this point in time, I'd like to bring up the chair of our task force for Cities of Opportunities, Mayor de Blasio.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson, for all of your leadership. I have to say, think about what you just heard, Mayor Johnson, representing Sacramento on the West Coast. Mayor Rawlings, our host here in Texas. I represent New York City in the Northeast. We all would use the exact same phrase. This is not just an inequality gap, an income gap, it is a chasm. I think it's a powerful point. And I thank Mayor Rawlings again for the sharpness with which he helped to lead off this conference as our host. And I thank Mayor Johnson for really drilling down on these issues and forming this task force, and I'm honored to lead it. The fact is, and you'll hear from all of my colleagues, I'm going to mention some of what they've been doing. I ran on a notion that we had to address the tale of two cities. We all know every one of our cities has that tale of two cities operating within it. We all know that now, sadly, there's two countries in terms of this chasm of divide in terms of income and opportunity. It can't go on. It can't go on functionally. It's not healthy. It does not allow us to have a strong, stable society. It certainly does not give people a sense of hope and belonging and participation. I mentioned a moment ago in my speech the CNN poll just recently drives home the point so powerfully. 59% of respondents nationally did not think the American dream was achievable for them. 63% were convinced their children could not do better than them. What has happened in this country when a clear majority of our people no longer feel they can access the very notion that all of us grew up with? And so the thesis here is that we're going to do something about it. We'd love the federal government to do something about it more forcefully, more coherently. We'd love a lot of our state governments to join with us, but while we're trying to create some of that momentum, we're going to do something to start the ball rolling. Because if you look around, each and every one of these cities represented here has done something profound to address inequality. Sometimes with one hand tied behind our back because we have not exactly been awash in federal and state resources. And yet, that hasn't stopped anyone. So I can say humbly, I'm the rookie here. I've only been on the job about 6 months, but we've tried to break the pattern in New York City. We're going to have full-day pre-K for all our children. We're going to have an affordable housing plan for 200,000 units over 10 years. We've passed a paid sick leave law that reaches 500,000 more people. We're taking action on a host of issues, including those that affect immigrants, like the municipal ID bill that will allow us to provide an ID for folks who have been left out because they're undocumented, but still are our neighbors. These are the kinds of things we're working on. Look at what's happening around the country, and you see this pattern so clearly. Obviously, the eyes of the nation have been on Seattle, and I commend Mayor Murray for his leadership passing the minimum wage bill. Commend Mayor Nutter for what he's done with a higher minimum wage for city contract employees. Minneapolis has this extraordinary Cradle to K initiative under the leadership of Mayor Hodges, trying to reach children early and give them a strong start. One by one, you see the same patterns. One of my personal favorites, having grown up in the Boston area, is Mayor Walsh's. Now, if you're from Boston, you'll immediately understand this wording. Mayor Walsh's quote-unquote wicked-free Wi-Fi program, which goes right at the question of internet access for all, which goes at the question of economic opportunity for all, and addressing the digital divide. Here in Houston, Mayor Parker's simple, straightforward idea that people who live here in Houston, I'm in Dallas, they're in Houston. Mayor Parker's simple, straightforward idea that you ought to hire people who haven't always had opportunity by hiring local. So her Hire Houston First plan implicitly reaches a lot of people who have not benefited from the economy. Look at what Mayor Rawlings is doing. It's not just what he said in the opening remarks of this conference. It's that he's put forth a task force to go right at the question of poverty, to name it and address it. Here's a guy who was a CEO of a major corporation, and he understands this is not a partisan issue. This is not an issue of just public sector or just private sector. It's something that we all have to grapple with. And so he's naming it and acting on it and convening his whole city in that common cause. Look around the country on these issues of addressing the challenges of immigrants, particularly undocumented immigrants. Mayor Garcetti in Los Angeles, Mayor Kwan in Oakland, Mayor Harp in New Haven, each and every one of these cities has passed a municipal ID program. That is the foundation for all we're going to do with our new Cities of Opportunity Task Force. Because as you've heard, each and every one of the mayors here and a lot of others are creating cities of opportunity in their own way. Without the support that they deserve from other levels of government, they're still making it happen. We have to build the models out, because a lot of times when one of us acts, it helps the other one act. It sets the bar higher. It shows what's possible. We have to amplify and speed that effort. So there's best practices, which is clearly something we all want to utilize as an idea, learning from each other's successes. But there's also organizing together to magnify our successes, help them happen more quickly, and then set an example for the federal government, an example for state governments of the kind of urgency that we need in making these changes. We have to reestablish an urban agenda for this nation, and as chair of this task force, I will be honored with Mayor Johnson and my colleagues to start to recreate something that was commonplace for decades, a strong, clear urban agenda that actually gets worked on and acted on in Washington. We'll be convening at Gracie Mansion on August 11th to plan out the next steps in this urgent effort. This is going to be a task force that does not just talk, but actually creates an action plan for cities around the country. It will be bipartisan. It will be inclusive. Doesn't matter which size city, which party you're in. If you want to fight inequality, if you want to create opportunity, you are welcome, and we need you. So I'm honored, I'm humbled to be part of this effort with my colleagues because I know we already are cracking the code. We're already making a difference. Now we have to do it on a much larger level. Before I finish, special thank you. I guess I can't say the special guest name, right? Because President Johnson doesn't want me to say Maria Shriver, so I won't. But sorry, that's the New York way of doing things. We just her 10-point, I love this, the City Festo, her 10-point City Festo for mayors to focus on improvement in policies that strengthen women and families. It's going to be a valuable tool to all of us, and we thank her for all she is doing. And now I have the honor of introducing a mayor he's new like me, but he's making a big impact already. And the city of Boston, I know it well, a place with a complicated history, amazing place in our nation, a place where great progress has happened, a place where there's been more than its fair share of challenges and divisions. But Mayor Walsh has been absolutely part of the solution, and there's an energy. I talk to people in Boston all the time. There's an energy he has created about taking on inequality head on, about healing up past wounds that people in Boston are feeling excitement about, and they're gratified to have a leader as good as them. Mayor Walsh.
Thank you, Mayor de Blasio, and I appreciate you taking on this task of being the chair of this. I want to thank Mayor Johnson as well for addressing this issue. I've been in politics now for almost 17 years, and every presidential election for the last, I don't know how many, we've been talking about the haves and the have-nots and the economic gap growing, and every year we have an election and we look back at the stats, and that growth between the people who have something and who don't just continues to grow and grow and grow and grow. And we have to do something about it in this country. And Mayor de Blasio spoke about some of the things that other mayors around the country have done, including what we have done. And just real quickly on wicked-free Wi-Fi, in 2006 in Boston, we spoke about having internet access to every neighborhood in the city of Boston. 2014, it wasn't there. And what we did was we focused on, we have to stop talking about it and let's roll it out. And we're looking at 20 of our Main Street districts in the city of Boston, and we rolled it out in one of them in the Grove Hall section. And we're going to be, over the next year and a half, we'll be rolling out in all 20 Main Street districts. Not just for those businesses, small businesses to grow, but also for the residents that live in those neighborhoods. We also opened up incubator space in the Ferdinand building, which is in Dudley, which is in Roxbury, the heart of our city. This incubator space is to look at what's happening on the waterfront in South Boston and in Boston, of great companies coming in and high tech coming in and thriving and doing well. And we're saying we need to bring incubator space into the heart of our city, into areas where people of color need to make sure that they get connected to this industry. And we're working on that as well right now in the city of Boston. We'll put together a housing task force to look at how do we pay for creating new housing. I can throw a number out there to you and tell you we're going to build this much housing in this many years and this is what we're going to do. But if we don't figure a way to pay for it, because we can't get it from the federal government, we can't get it from the state government, the city government doesn't have it, how can we put a task force together that we can have all the partners, including labor, at the table to be able to create housing in the city of Boston? That's something that we're working on right now. And in Boston, we're also looking at universal pre-K. I commend Mayor de Blasio for his efforts and working hard to make sure they have it in New York. We're not there today. We're getting there. My first budget, when I sat down with the school department, they came back to me and they had a cut in universal pre-K line item. I said, no, that's not going to happen. We want an increase. It's a modest increase, but it's an increase. We need to go this way instead of this way. So I am honored to be here today. The mayors behind you and the mayors that are at this conference, we are the ones ultimately that have to address the issues in our community. We have issues. Mayor de Blasio again mentioned the history of Boston. You know, My Brother's Keeper, an initiative by President Obama that he's put forth, is an important initiative for us in the city of Boston. But in order to get to where we want to get to, we have to talk about busing. We have to talk about all of the things in our city that have been a problem, that have drawn racial divides in our city that still, in some cases, still exist there today. So we have to deal with the root of the problem, and then we can get to fixing our problem for black and brown boys in the city of Boston, this country. So I am honored to be on this task force. I want to thank Mayor Johnson for appointing me to this task force. It's a task force that I know we can make a difference in our country. And I know we have to make a difference in our country. We have to stop talking about the divide, and we have to start to close that divide. Thank you very much.
All right, next up, I'd like to welcome a good friend, the mayor of Philadelphia, who's doing incredible work, and he also is going to be chairing and co-chairing a task force on My Brother's Keeper. And I know we have Mayor Davis out in the audience as well. When we talk about the least among us, our commitment, again, preschool and access for all kids, mayors around this conference have made a commitment that universal preschool is something that's really important. We talked about affordable housing. That's important. We're talking about broadband access. We're talking about women issues. We're talking about immigrants. All those things that we as mayors, we want to be the leaders in these areas. We don't want to sit on the sidelines. And the president this past February said, you know what species is most endangered right now? It's the black males in this country. And he started a task force called My Brother's Keepers, and Mayor Nutter is our leader on that. Mayor Nutter.
A couple of things. Mayor Johnson, one, thank you for appointing me as the co-chair along with Mayor Bell in Birmingham for this particular task force. And also, thank you for creating this new task force led by our good friend Mayor de Blasio in New York. All of these issues are America's issues. And the best folks to get things done on the ground, as we talk about, really are mayors. And so establishing the connection between what happens at the local level, the perspective from the national level, and certainly in many instances the frustration that all of us experience with the gridlock in Washington, D.C. But we see again, at least in this particular instance, the executive at the federal level. Of course, the President of the United States talks a great deal about having a pen and a phone. He talked at the State of the Union about the need to give America a raise. And that, quite frankly, was much of the inspiration behind the fact that I then signed last month an executive order requiring all city contractors to raise the rate of pay for the folks who work at those companies immediately to $10.88 and automatically on January 1st to $12. That has now been put into law in Philadelphia subsequent to the executive order that I signed. We deal with issues of poverty. Philadelphia, unfortunately, for many positive things going on in the city, we are still grappling with high poverty rates in many parts of the city of Philadelphia. So we created this shared prosperity plan in Philadelphia, targeted to coordinate all of our resources that are coming from a variety of places, but to ultimately put them in one place to significantly attack the issue of poverty in the city of Philadelphia. And so these efforts, combined with, again, all of these mayors, focused on poverty, focused on crime, focused on disparities. When you look at the My Brother's Keeper report, and I'll leave you with this, and it won't be a particular upnote, black males represent 6% of the population of the United States of America, 6%. But they are 43% of the homicide victims all across the United States of America. This is a national problem. It is a crisis in the making. And lack of opportunity, lack of health care, lack of educational attainment, the fact that we have to fight in so many instances to get universal pre-K, something that is known and established. There's not one study anywhere that you could ever find that doesn't show that it pays dividends. You'll pay less up front than you'll ever pay on the back end. And so full and fair funding, an issue that we're grappling with in Pennsylvania around education. Our state, unfortunately, is one of only 3 states in the United States of America that does not use a student-weighted funding formula to distribute education funds. And then we wonder why we have the disparities all across the Commonwealth when it comes to education. Mayors are leading the way. We know how to get stuff done. We are providing example after example after example of what our national government, what our federal partners should be doing. But as executives, we use that pen, we use that phone, we use our leadership, and in a collective effort, we will drive the agenda of the United States of America. So I'm pleased to be a part of this effort. It is exciting to work with these mayors to get stuff done and make America the great place we all want it to be. Thanks a lot.
All right, next up, it's my pleasure to introduce the Mayor of Houston, Mayor Parker. She's a leader on a number of issues, in particular immigration reform. She was featured in Tom Friedman's column. He wrote a column, I Want to Be a Mayor, for her program that connects new immigrants with low-cost banking, education, childcare, and health care. Round of applause for our mayor, down the way from Dallas, Mayor of Houston.
We're all hitting the same notes here today. I want to focus on a couple of, my acronym is E. Education, immigration, incarceration, income, and then imagination. We all know we have education issues to overcome, primarily starting with early childhood education. From a moment a child is born, that child is influenced by its surroundings, and the fewer words that child hears, and the less stimulation that child receives, the impacts will last that child's entire life. All of those E's, the most important is imagination. There is poverty of income, but the most critical poverty is the poverty of ideas and imagination. Because what's happening in America is that we're creating generations of young people who do not know the promise of America, don't know that they can't reach the promise of America, and have no concept of what a future could be. When we were growing up, and many of us grew up in modest circumstances, we at least knew that there were better things out there. Our children don't know. This is about coming together and laying out the range of best practices, but most importantly, that sound I made earlier, that's the alarm bell ringing for all of us. Thank you.
All right, I am finally honored and get the honor to bring up a special guest, but one bit of housekeeping. Mayor de Blasio, I gave you one clear set of instructions. I just said, just don't say her name. Let me be the one. Going forward, he is no longer the chair of this task force. He stayed in that position for about 8 minutes.
It was a great 8 minutes.
Mayor Walsh, will you mind chairing our city?
Just like we saw the Yankees.
If you've been following anything that you've heard up here today, mayors are about action, and we're about getting things done. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. We all talk about jobs and economic prosperity, but if we do not bring along those who have been sitting on the sidelines, we're not doing our part as leaders of our cities. We're not shying away from those topics. And I think each and every mayor, when we look back in history, there's always somebody's shoulders that you're standing on. There was somebody who came before us that led this way. And when you think about the war on poverty many years ago, everybody knows who led that charge. And we are so proud to have a lady here today with us. She doesn't go on the circuit very often. She doesn't do pressers very often. She only does them when she has something to say. And that, to me, is somebody who's judicious with her time. And for her to be here today for us is just a huge, huge deal. So give her a round of applause, even before I bring her up. I've got a chance to know Maria for probably the last 6 or 7 years. And she's been the conscience of California. She's been the conscience of our country. And she has a new report out. And for all of you who are here today, she's going to talk for a few minutes, and then we'll answer some questions. And then we're going to have a conversation, myself and the new chair here, Mayor You know what? I'm going to keep you around. I'm going to give you one more chance. One more chance. Are you sure?
I won't screw it up, Coach.
So at this point in time, let's give a warm welcome to the one and only Maria Shriver.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really honored to be here with all of these incredible mayors. I've lived in many of the cities that they represent, lived in Philadelphia, lived in Boston, lived in Sacramento, lived in New York. Haven't made it to Texas, but I hear they have a good tax structure down here. So you took a lot of our California jobs. I want to talk to you about that later. But I'm really honored, Mayor Johnson, who I got to know when I was First Lady of California, invited me down here several months ago. And I wanted to come because I really believe that mayors are on the front lines of what I call humanity. They are what people come to know as their government. They are the elected officials that they feel they have a relationship with. And I think as so many of the mayors talked about here at this press conference, and I know they've been talking about it here at this meeting, it is the place where innovative ideas are born. It's where bold action is taken. And it really is the front lines of what we can become in this nation. So I wanted to come down here to talk particularly about the 44 million women in this country, working women, who find themselves on the brink of poverty, and the 28 million children who depend on them. I'm a big believer that if women's lives are empowered, if women are able to take care of their children, take care of their families, we as a nation will be much better off. 70% of all minimum wage jobs are held by women, and that's women with children, women who are also not only what I call breadwinning, not only raising children, but also in unpaid caregiving jobs for elderly parents. More than 40 million Americans find themselves in unpaid caregiving jobs while also holding down full-time jobs. And they need different kinds of policies from our government, from our local leaders, from business. And so I'm really excited that this task force is really going to talk about people who live on the brink. We talk about income inequality, haves and have-nots, but I think the Shriver Report has tried very much to kind of reimagine and market the face of poverty in this country. When my father led the war on poverty 50 years ago, we always talked about government solutions, and the image of poverty was urban America or Appalachia. Now that image is that plus a working woman. It is someone who doesn't, quote, look poor, who doesn't look like they're struggling, and yet they have no savings. They're in a job that has no benefits. They can't get any help with child care, much less elder care or flexibility. So I'm here to talk about those women who are partnering with many of the men that you talked about that are in crisis in this country. I'm talking about the children who grow up in homes, and the effect of poverty, as the mayor was saying, is lifelong. And so when we were doing the Shriver Report, and it's a nonprofit journalism endeavor, and I would go to people and say, we're going to focus on women. And they'd say, well, you know, I don't want to really focus on women. I focus only on poor children. And I said, well, those children have mothers. And they're like, oh, well, I didn't kind of connect that. And I'm like, wow. So I think that I hope this task force will really focus on the struggles of the American woman who really is trying to do the best for her children, the best for her family. That's what the Shriver Report is about. It sets forth ideas for government, for business, and for women and men themselves. I think also the thing of 50 years ago, we talked about a lot of government solutions, and there were a lot of great ones that came from the war on poverty that Daddy, along with President Johnson, started that still work very effectively today, whether it's Head Start, Job Corps, Vista, legal services for the poor. But in our report, we talk about also what businesses can do, and we talk about what individuals can do, personal responsibility, education before children, women to think of themselves as providers, not people who are going to be provided for, understanding that having a child is an economic choice, and also about how to include men in this conversation. So much of what we learned also in the Shriver Report, particularly with African American men, is that they wanted to be involved in their children's lives. The image that they didn't is incorrect. And so there's a lot of, I think, miscommunication out there between the genders, which I hope you'll look at in this report. I think there are things that are particular to women who find themselves, as I said, in caregiving and breadwinning positions, but that's happening with men now more than ever. Men are being called upon to care for elderly parents. Men are looking for flexibility in the workplace. Men are looking for paternity leave. Men are looking for support in child care. So I think this task force is coming at exactly the right time. I want to commend all of these mayors for stepping up and first recognizing it. I think that's a big thing. In the 60s, there were a lot of elected officials talking about poverty. There were a lot of people writing about it. And that hasn't been the case in the last several years. So I think it's so fantastic that these mayors are stepping forward and saying, we have an income inequality issue. We want to tackle it. on behalf of men, on behalf of women, and behalf of children, that millions and millions of Americans feel unseen, unheard. They don't feel government knows that they're out there, that they're working hard. We did a film called Paycheck to Paycheck, and everywhere I went in the country, people came up to me and said, that's my story. That is my story, and I don't feel that political figures know that that's my story. So they will now know, I think, today, and they know because there's so many great things going on in these cities, and a lot of it is marketing and communicating what's out there. So I hope that this task force will look at bold ideas. I know there's so many innovative things going on. I'm really thrilled to be here and to talk about what we call our City Festo, which is about how we think mayors of both parties can move their cities forward. There's a lot of really exciting things that the mayor and I will have a chance to talk about. And so I'm here because I believe in the mayors on the front lines of humanity. I believe that they can make government and are making government work. I particularly like what Boston is doing, trying to be the first city to close the pay gap for women with the Boston Compact. I love the cities working to raise the minimum wage because that does affect poverty, and there's so much more. So I hope we'll be able to talk about elder care, child care, flexibility, and women at the center of their families. So thank you, Mayor Johnson, for inviting me, and congratulations to all of you for stepping forward and making this a priority for mayors throughout the country. Thank you.
All right, I'll make one closing comment, and then we'll take two questions. And for anybody, Maria will be in our next session, and we'll have a conversation. I think probably my biggest takeaway is 50 years ago, we were having this conversation. And in some respects, we've went the wrong direction. And the mantle and the baton has been passed from a father to a daughter. And she is here reminding us that when we're here 50 years from now, we better not be having the same conversation. That gap needs to be. So I'm really proud of the mayors. I want to thank Maria again for coming out. Tom and you and your organization have wanted to make sure that we keep this idea front and center. So we'll take a couple questions, and then we're going to head to our next event. So any questions from the audience? Yes.
I have a question for either Mayor Parker or Rawlings about Texas specifically. There was some discussion in the previous panel on climate change about, the issues of mayors dealing with state officials that may not be interested in, they may be skeptics of climate change, or they may be skeptics of some of the income inequality things that you're looking to do. How do you sort of handle that at your city level, dealing with larger skepticism? And is there a realistic way of trying to use your city as an example to inspire change?
I'll tell you the good news and the bad news about Texas. We don't receive money from the state of Texas. We are chief executives of our own cities, and we have extreme executive power. I actually am considered the strongest strong mayor in the United States. We are a leader in renewable energy. We are a leader in reducing greenhouse gases. I know it's important to the planet, but the conversation I have with my constituents is it's good for the city's bottom line. It's not incompatible with being the headquarters of the world oil and gas industry. It is just as important that we lead in our own cities on these issues of income inequality. I don't think, and obviously the governor and I belong to different parties and we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but he is just as interested in making sure that Texas thrives economically as I am. And there is always a way to come together around that issue in terms of strengthening our economic opportunities.
Yeah, I will echo some of the things that the mayor said. Focusing on the income disparity issue, we can sit here and whine and complain that somebody's not doing something in the state capitol or in Washington. Or we can be accountable to this issue and to our citizens. So first of all, it's a sense of attitude and how you approach this. Second, I think Mayor Parker's strategy is dead on. Ultimately, this is about human rights, but there is a bottom line issue. This income disparity is costing us millions and millions and millions of dollars. And we can take money and spend it the right way, or we can waste the money. That is a conversation that everybody in Texas knows how to have because we do like money. And I think that's where you start with an agreement, find solutions to deal with these issues that work, and that's why I'm so excited about this task force.
I'll just say one quick point. When you talk about climate, we believe that there's a risk and we've got to mitigate on one hand, but there's also opportunities for a new market. There's energy markets out there, and the most innovative technologies are going to create jobs for people. So it gets at the double bottom line for all of us, and that's what we're so excited. This is not something that we're waiting for a government to solve a problem. We're looking at it in innovative ways where we're bringing the public and the private sector together to create jobs. So when you think about an energy market and the latest technologies and what innovations create, that's real. And we want to make sure those jobs go to some of the new immigrants in our community. We want to make sure some of those jobs go to people who had been left on the sidelines before. Mayor Nutter talked about it a moment ago. When you think about black boys, just for one instance, the college population for black males, 5%. 5%. Prison population for black males, a third, 35%. That's just unacceptable. And what we're hearing time and time again, and this is what Maria was talking about, people on the sidelines, they want access to good schools early on so that you have options so you can be meaningfully employed. The people that are incarcerated over and over again, they felt they were limited with their opportunities. There's no one who wants to sit on the sidelines and not work and not be contributors to our society and be tax-paying members. They want that dignity. Women, men, across the board, and that's what we're committed to doing. I mean, the diversity that you see up here is real. We're not just talking. We're not waiting for somebody else to solve the problems. We don't have that luxury. All right, last question. Going once. Going twice.
Good morning. Would you, if you or your city would be talking about the humanitarian crisis on the border with the children?
Anybody want to address water on children? The
Humanitarian, undocumented children on the border.
I'll add one thing. Last night we had a meeting of Texas mayors. Mayor Raul Salinas from Laredo spoke and talked to us about the heartbreak that is happening with these children. We committed as mayors to join arms together to help him. So we all agreed that we were going to go away, figure out what each of us can do, and pull together as mayors of Texas to do this. We did it with Katrina. This issue is as important, smaller, but we can make a difference. This is a issue. This is a humanitarian issue, and we need to step up. So we committed to that. Thank you.
All right. The final question here I'm going to ask to Maria. You know, you've traveled around the country with the Schreiber Report. Tell us one story, one interaction that you've had that you feel has been most compelling for you, that's renewed your spirit, that you think it would be important for mayors to hear, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I don't think there's one story. It's been kind of constant and since our report is specifically focused on women and their families, over and over again, these were women who said, I want to work. I'm not looking for a handout. I'm looking for a hand up. I want the dignity of work. I don't want to be on the brink. I want to show my children that they can achieve the American dream. So I need something that can help me up here just a little bit till I get over it, but I want to pursue my education. I want a job that understands me, where I can thrive and grow, and I want my children to see that the American dream is alive and well. So that's why I'm here, because I think that the mayors have a great ability to show those women, their families, their partners, their children, that the American dream is still attainable, that it is open to all, regardless of the zip code you were born into or where you live, that you can go back to school, that you can better yourself, that you can provide for your children. And I'm hopeful, and I believe that everybody up here is an architect of change. And I hope that they will listen to regular Americans who are out there, who have ideas, who know what their lives are like, who know what they need to get up off the brink and keep going. And I'm really excited about this renewed focus I think it will do a lot to address the poverty of imagination that you spoke about. I believe in inspiration, information, igniting people to make an impact. And I think that's exactly, I talk about eyes, I think that's exactly what this task force is going to do. They're on the front lines of humanity. The majority of Americans are struggling, the vast majority. And when I see 42 million women on the brink working, and their children who depend on them, I know that we can do better. And I'm going to the White House tomorrow, which is hosting its very first summit on working families, the very first summit, 2014, on working families. And I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about what the mayors are doing, and I will challenge the federal government and businesses and women and men themselves to do exactly what they're doing. Focus, pay attention, ignite, and make an impact. So thank you.
All right, that concludes our task force. Mayor de Blasio, thanks for chairing it, and thanks to all the mayors. Thank you very much.